Have you ever wondered why the most touching stories in the Bible involve so much suffering and sacrifice? The account of the tragic death of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, is one of those moments that makes us reflect on the meaning of pain, love, and divine promises. Rachel's life is marked by intense moments of desire, struggle, and loss. But why, at the height of his happiness, was his fate so cruel? What can we learn from this ancient narrative? In this video, we will explore Rachel's life in depth, from the moment she met Jacob to the painful outcome of her journey. I'll tell you details you may never have noticed, show the profound lessons behind each event, and bring you a new perspective on the meaning of his tragic death. Stay with me until the end of this video, because Rachel's story carries valuable lessons that still touch us deeply today. Who was Rachel? Rachel wasn't just another character in Jacob's story. She was the true love of his life, the woman Jacob worked for. 14 years to finally have her by his side. From their first meeting at the edge of a well, Jacob knew that Rachel was special. And their devotion to her not only shaped the trajectory of their lives, but also had a direct impact on the future of the people of Israel. However, Rachel, like all of us, had her own internal struggles. For years, she lived the suffering of not being able to bear children, while her sister Leah, with whom she shared a husband, gave her several heirs. This silent suffering reminds us that often even the most beloved and revered figures face internal battles that are not always visible to the outside world. The promise and hope. After many years of waiting, God heard Rachel's prayers. She eventually gave birth to Joseph, who would go on to be an extremely important figure in biblical history. But, as often happens, Rachel's happiness would not last forever. Pregnant with her second child, she would face a devastating fate that would forever change the story of Jacob and his family. Rachel died while giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. And it was in this final moment of his life that the pain of his existence reached its climax. What would have gone through Rachel's mind when she realized that her life was hanging in the balance as she fought to bring a long-awaited child into the world? This is one of the questions that we will explore in more depth throughout this video, and you will be surprised by the revelations we will bring. Have you ever imagined what it would be like if, suddenly, you met the love of your life in a completely unexpected way at a moment that seemed ordinary? This is exactly what happened to Jacob and Rachel. This love story began in such an impactful way that it still affects those who read the scriptures today. But behind this encounter, there are layers of meaning that reveal more than just love at first sight. They show the divine plan in action and the difficulties that would follow. The story of Jacob and Rachel begins in a simple scenario, but full of symbolism. Jacob, grandson of Abraham and son of Isaac, was on a journey when, suddenly, his life would change forever. He had left his homeland fleeing from his brother Esau, who was furious about the blessing that Jacob had taken from him. And it is at this point in Jacob's journey that he arrives at a well in the city of Haran, the place where destiny would unite his life with Rachel's. Rachel was a sheep herder, a task not very common for women at the time, but which already revealed her strength and determination. When Jacob first saw her, she was leading her father Laban's flock. In that instant, Jacob not only felt a deep attraction for her, but also an immediate connection that made him know that Rachel would be the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. In the Bible, the well is a place often associated with important and divine encounters. Isaac himself, Jacob's father, met his wife Rebekah at a well, and now the same scenario was repeated in his son's life. This chance meeting was much more than a coincidence. It was part of God's plan to unite Jacob and Rachel. Jacob, overcome by a deep emotion, decides to help Rachel remove the stone that covered the well, a gesture that symbolized not only his physical strength, but also his desire to care for and protect Rachel from that moment on. The scene is powerful. Jacob, who had fled his homeland in fear, finds new hope and purpose alongside Rachel. Love at first sight and the great sacrifice. As soon as he met Rachel, Jacob was welcomed into the house of his uncle Laban, Rachel and Leah's father, and stayed there for a month. During this time, Jacob and Rachel got to know each other better, and the love between them grew quickly and intensely. Jacob knew he wanted Rachel as his wife, but the path to that would not be easy. After this first month, Laban proposed to Jacob that he work for him in exchange for his salary. It was then that Jacob, without hesitation, made a surprising proposal. He would work 7 years as payment for marrying Rachel. This gesture reveals how much Jacob was willing to sacrifice for that love. He didn't care about the time, the effort, or the difficulties he would face. What mattered to him was being able to be with the woman he loved. The 7 years that Jacob spent working for Rachel were not seen by him as a burden. On the contrary, the Bible reports that they seemed to him as a few days because of the love he had for her. Genesis 29, verse 20. This intense and unshakable love is one of Jacob's most striking characteristics, and also a reflection of how much he valued Rachel. Time seemed to pass faster because he knew that, at the end of it all, he would have the woman his heart so desired by his side. But what Jacob didn't know is that, despite all his sacrifice, he would face a great disappointment at the end of the years. 7 years. The great disappointment. Leah in Rachel's place. After fulfilling the 7 years of work, the time had finally arrived for Jacob to marry Rachel. The long-awaited day arrived, and the ceremony took place. But that night, when Jacob went to the tent, something unexpected happened. In Rachel's place, he found his sister Leah. Laban had deceived Jacob, taking advantage of the tradition that the eldest daughter should marry before the youngest. He replaced Rachel with Leah overnight, and Jacob didn't find out until the next morning. Imagine Jacob's surprise and disappointment when he realized that, even after 7 years from hard work, he still hadn't managed to marry the woman he loved. Jacob's reaction was immediate. He confronted Laban, demanding an explanation. Laban then argued that in his land it was not customary to marry the youngest daughter before the oldest. However, he made a new proposal to Jacob. He could marry Rachel, but he would have to work for more 7 years. This was, without a doubt, one of the hardest trials Jacob faced. He had been deceived, betrayed by someone he trusted, but the love he felt for Rachel was so great that he accepted the deal without hesitation. He married Rachel just a week after marrying Leah, but continued to work for longer. 7 years to fulfill the promise made to Laban, the love that overcame everything. The story of Jacob and Rachel teaches us profound lessons about love, patience, and faith. Jacob, moved by a sincere and pure love, did not hesitate to work for 14 years to have Rachel by his side. This love was so strong that the time of service seemed to pass quickly, and even Laban's betrayal was not enough to deter Jacob from his purpose. What does this part of the story of Jacob and Rachel teach us? That true love is resilient and is willing to face any obstacle. Jacob did not give up, even in the face of the difficulties imposed by life. He worked, waited, and in the end, he was able to live next to the woman he loved so much. Have you ever imagined what it's like to deeply desire something, but have to face the constant anguish of not getting it? This was Rachel's reality. Even though she was loved intensely by Jacob, she carried a pain that consumed her, the inability to bear children. At a time when motherhood was considered one of a woman's greatest achievements, Rachel faced years of suffering. And while his sister Leah bore Jacob several sons, Rachel's wait seemed endless. But why did God make her wait so long? And what is the divine purpose behind this delay? Rachel's story reveals profound lessons about patience, faith, and God's will. Let's discover how this pain shaped his destiny and what it teaches us today. Rachel's pain and God's silence. After marrying Jacob, Rachel expected that, like her sister Leah, she would quickly become pregnant and give birth to children who would continue Jacob's lineage. However, what she didn't know was that the journey to motherhood would be fraught with challenges. While Leah, the sister Jacob did not love, soon gave him 4 children: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel faced God's silence in relation to her greatest desire, to be a mother. The Bible tells us that Rachel was barren, Genesis 29, verse 31, and this fact brought immense suffering to her life. Being unable to bear children in the culture of the time was not only a personal issue, but also a social one. Rachel knew that without children, her position as a wife would be weakened, especially in comparison to her sister, who had already borne Jacob 4 heirs. Jacob's love for Rachel remained strong, but the pressure she felt, both internally and externally, was immense. Rachel, in a moment of despair, cried out to Jacob, "Give me children, or I will die." Genesis 30, verse 1. This cry of anguish reveals the weight she carried in her heart. For her, life without children seemed purposeless, and her pain was so intense it seemed unbearable. But Jacob, realizing that this matter was beyond his control, responded firmly, "Am I in the place of God, who withheld from you the fruit of your wombs?" Genesis 30, verse 2. With this, Jacob made it clear that only God could grant Rachel the desire to be a mother. This response from Jacob reminds us that even in the most desperate situations, there are things that are beyond human reach. Rachel was learning, in a painful way, that waiting was part of God's plan for her life. The silent rivalry between Raquel and Leah. While Rachel faced the anguish of not being able to conceive, her sister Leah continued to give Jacob more children. After your first 4 children, Leah had 2 more, Issachar and Zebulun. This difference in the number of children created silent tension between the sisters, especially because Rachel was Jacob's favorite, but was unable to fulfill the role she expected as a mother. In the culture of the time, giving children to the husband not only strengthened the wife's position, but also ensured that she would have a legacy in the family. Therefore, Raquel's inability to have children left her increasingly frustrated, and Leah's happiness seemed to increase the suffering she already felt. Rachel, in an act of desperation similar to that of Sarah, Abraham's wife, made a decision that changed the course of her story. She gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob so that she could bear children in her place. Rachel thought that by doing this, Bilhah's children would be considered hers, just as Hagar's children were considered Sarah's. Bilhah gave birth to 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. When the second son was born, Rachel said, "I have competed with my sister with great struggles and have won." Genesis 30, verse 8. This moment reflects the unspoken competition between Rachel and Leah, a rivalry that was not just about Jacob's love, but also about his ability to produce heirs for him. Although Rachel conquered in her own view by having children through her servant, it did not completely alleviate her pain. The desire to have her own children still burned in her heart. The miracle of life, the birth of Joseph. After years of waiting, finally what Raquel dreamed of happened. The Bible tells us that God remembered Rachel, and God heard her and opened her womb. Genesis 30, verse 22. God's silence had come to an end, and Rachel, after so much suffering and despair, conceived a son. Rachel gave birth to Joseph, one of the most important characters in biblical history. When giving her name, she said, "God has taken away my shame." Genesis 30, verse 23. Joseph was not just a son to Rachel. He represented the victory of his faith and patience. After years of humiliation and rivalry with her sister, Raquel could finally hold her own son in her arms. Joseph's birth brought new hope to Raquel's life. She knew that God had answered her prayers, and this son was proof that even in the most difficult times, God's plan was in progress. Joseph, in turn, would become one of the most influential men in history, saving his own family during a period of famine and becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt. Raquel's joy at that moment had no limits. The desire for more, Raquel's last request. Although Rachel finally gave birth to Joseph, she was not satisfied. The desire to give Jacob more children still burned in his heart. And then she prayed a bold prayer. She asked God for another son. Despite having finally experienced the joy of motherhood, Raquel wanted more. She knew that God could grant her one more blessing, and in her faith, she prayed for it. This prayer, however, would have a tragic outcome. Raquel became pregnant again, but little did she know that this would be the last pregnancy of her life. The desire for another child would be granted, but at the cost of his own life. But what led Raquel to pay such a high price? Did her story need to end so tragically? The birth of her second son, Benjamin, would seal Raquel's fate in an unexpected and moving way. When everything seemed to be finally aligning in Raquel's life, a new pregnancy brought hope of another divine blessing. However, this joy would be short-lived. Raquel's destiny was about to take an unexpected and tragic turn. Her desire for a second child, after years of waiting, would become her greatest pain, the pain that would lead to her death. In this subtitle, we will explore how Benjamin's birth marked the end of Rachel's journey, revealing profound lessons about sacrifice, life, and death. Raquel's new pregnancy, hope or warning sign. After Jose's birth, Raquel had experienced a moment of immense happiness. After all, after years of waiting, God had finally heard his prayers and granted him a son. However, for Raquel, motherhood sparked an even greater desire to expand her family. Even with the pain she faced throughout her life, she wanted to give Jacob another son, and with that, her hope was renewed. Some time later, Raquel became pregnant again. It was the fulfillment of his prayer and a new chapter that was beginning. However, what she didn't know was that this pregnancy would not only bring the joy of a new birth, but also a tragic outcome. The journey she would face would be her last. Unlike her first pregnancy, this one would be more complicated, and as the Bible reveals to us, the birth of her second child would not be easy. But why would Raquel face so many difficulties? Was it a test of faith or a warning sign? For Raquel, the complications that would come were unknown, but the hope of holding another child in her arms was enough to keep going. The road to Ephrata, the final journey. The Bible tells us that while Jacob and his family were on their way to Ephrathah, the time for Rachel's birth arrived. However, this birth would not be like Jose's. This time, Raquel would face difficulties so intense that her own life would be at risk. The road to Ephrata, later to be called Bethlehem, was the scene of the impending tragedy. Raquel's birth began while they were still traveling, which certainly increased the risk. Without adequate structure or medical care, the situation quickly worsened. Jacob, always by Raquel's side, was about to face one of the most painful moments of his life. Raquel went into labor, but the pain and complications were much greater than she expected. As she struggled to give birth, it became clear something was wrong. The pain was intense, and the midwife herself, who attended the birth, knew that the situation was critical. She tried to comfort Rachel, telling her, "Do not be afraid, for you will also have this son." Genesis 35, verse 17. However, these words of comfort were not enough to ease the burden Raquel was carrying at that moment. She was on the verge of death. The death of Raquel, the final price of motherhood. Raquel gave birth to her second child, but the price was high. By the time the boy was born, his life was slipping away. The Bible reports that, as she breathed her last breaths, Rachel named her son Benoni, which means son of my sorrow, Genesis 35, verse 18. This name reflects the depth of suffering she experienced during childbirth. Benoni was Raquel's last gift, but also the last memory of her fight. Jacob, upon seeing his beloved wife leave, made a decision that, in a way, was an act of love and redemption. He changed the boy's name to Benjamin, which means son of the right hand or son of my strength. This name not only honored Rachel's sacrifice, but also gave Benjamin a new identity, separate from his mother's pain. Benjamin, as Jacob's youngest son, would carry an important legacy, being the last of the 12 children that would form the tribes of Israel. Rachel died shortly after giving birth, and Jacob, deeply shaken, buried her right there on the side of the road to Ephrathah. He erected a pillar over Rachel's tomb, which stood as a memorial for generations. Genesis 35, verses 19 to 20. This act by Jacob was a way of eternalizing the memory of his beloved wife, who suffered so much and loved so much. The meaning of Rachel's death, sacrifice, and legacy. Rachel's death is one of the most tragic in the Bible, not only because of the loss itself, but because of the context in which it occurred. Rachel, the woman Jacob worked for 14 years, did not live to see his children grow up or to share with Jacob the fruits of his sacrifice. Her legacy, however, lived on through Joseph and Benjamin, the two sons she bore. Rachel's sacrifice can be seen in several ways. For many, Her death during childbirth symbolizes the price some people pay to fulfill a greater purpose. Rachel passionately wanted to be a mother and was willing to do anything to achieve that goal. Even though this led to his death, his faith and determination are remembered to this day. Furthermore, his death in Bethlehem, the place that would later become known as the birthplace of Jesus, carries prophetic significance. Just as Rachel wept for her children, the city of Bethlehem would witness another mother who would weep for the loss of her son, the Virgin Mary, in a deep and symbolic connection between these two biblical stories. Rachel's memory, a lesson in love and patience. Rachel's legacy has lasted for generations. To this day, his tomb is visited by thousands of people who seek to honor his memory and reflect on the lessons of his life. Rachel is remembered not only as a mother who gave birth to two of Israel's most important patriarchs, but also as a woman who faced immense challenges with unwavering patience and faith. Rachel's life teaches us that, even in the most difficult situations, love and faith can take us beyond what we imagine possible. Rachel loved deeply, not only Jacob, but also God. And although her story ended tragically, her example continues to inspire people across generations. Rachel may have tragically passed away, but her influence has continued to echo through the centuries. The legacy she left behind is profound, both through her children and through the memory of her life. Joseph, his firstborn, played a crucial role in the history of the people of Israel, and Benjamin, the son who was born in pain, became one of the patriarchs of the tribes of Israel. In this subtitle, we'll explore how Rachel's sacrifice shaped her family's future and why her story continues to be remembered today. Prepare to discover the profound implications of his legacy and the impact his children had on the course of history. Jose, the favorite son and the destiny that saved a nation. Rachel's firstborn, Joseph, occupies a special place in the biblical narrative. From the moment of his birth, Joseph was treated as Jacob's favorite son, which created a complex dynamic between him and his brothers. As the son of his most beloved wife, Jose gained a privileged status within the family, which sparked jealousy and rivalries that would change his life forever. Jacob demonstrated his love for Joseph clearly, giving him a special gift, a colorful tunic, a symbol of his predilection for him. However, this favoritism did not go unnoticed by his brothers, who soon began to harbor deep resentment against Joseph. What they didn't know, however, was that Joseph's destiny was tied to a greater plan, a plan that saved the entire nation of Israel. The prophetic dreams that Joseph had, in which he saw his brothers bowing down to him, with a spark that ignited even more anger in their hearts. Driven by envy, Joseph's brothers decided to get rid of him, selling him as a slave to merchants heading to Egypt. This was the beginning of an unexpected journey for Joseph, who would go from slave to governor of Egypt, in one of the most dramatic twists in the Bible. Even in Egypt, Joseph continued to be guided by his faith in God. He faced injustices and hardships, such as when he was unjustly imprisoned on false charges made by Potiphar's wife. But despite these trials, Joseph maintained his faith and trust in God's plans. His God-given wisdom and discernment led him to correctly interpret Pharaoh's dreams, predicting 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of hunger. This interpretation not only saved Egypt from a crisis, but also placed Joseph in a position of power. As second in command, Jose coordinated a plan to store food during the 7 years' abundance, which guaranteed the survival of the people during the 7 years of scarcity. And it was this same hunger that brought his brothers back to him, years later, in search of food. In the emotional reunion with his family, Joseph showed mercy and forgiveness, revealing that God had used his brother's betrayal for a greater good. Rachel did not live to see Joseph's success, but his legacy continued through her son, who became one of the most powerful and influential men in the ancient world. Joseph is remembered not only for his ability to interpret dreams, but for his ability to forgive and trust in God's plan, even when everything seemed lost. Benjamin, the son of the right hand and the formation of a faithful tribe. If Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, Benjamin was the son of pain and hope. Born at the most tragic moment in his mother's life, Benjamin represented both Rachel's sacrifice and the continuity of her lineage. Jacob, by renaming him from Benoni, son of my pain, to Benjamin, son of my right hand, was establishing a future of honor and strength for his last son. The tribe of Benjamin became one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and its importance throughout biblical history is notable. Despite being one of the smallest tribes in terms of numbers, the tribe of Benjamin stood out for its bravery and loyalty. During times of battle and conflict, the Benjamites were known for their combat prowess, especially their unique ability to use their left hand to fight, something unusual and effective in warfare. One of the most notable characters from the tribe of Benjamin was the first king of Israel, Saul. Chosen by God and anointed by the prophet Samuel, Saul was a Benjamite and represented the strength and vigor of his tribe. Although Saul's reign was marked by internal conflicts and an eventual fall, his ascension to the throne of Israel was a milestone in the history of God's people. In addition to Saul, the tribe of Benjamin also gave rise to one of the most influential apostles in the New Testament, Paul of Tarsus, known as the Apostle Paul. Before his conversion to Christianity, Paul was a fervent Pharisee who persecuted Christians, but after his encounter with Jesus Christ, he became one of the greatest defenders of the Christian faith. Paul wrote much of the New Testament and played a crucial role in the spread of Christianity. His zeal, intelligence, and unwavering faith made him one of the most important leaders of the early church, and all of this can be traced back to his roots in the tribe of Benjamin. Rachel's tomb, a memorial of hope and pain. To this day, Rachel's tomb is a place of great reverence and respect. Located on the road between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, the tomb is visited by thousands of people every year. Jews, Christians, and Muslims consider Rachel an important figure in the faith, and her tomb has become a symbol of motherhood, pain, and hope. The tradition of visiting Rachel's tomb is particularly strong among women who pray for children, seeking inspiration and comfort in the story of their struggle for motherhood. The image of Rachel weeping for her lost children is a recurring theme in Scripture, especially in Jeremiah 31 verse 15, where it says, "A voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel cries for her children and refuses to be comforted because they no longer exist." This passage, written many centuries after Rachel's death, connects her grief to Israel's future history, particularly when the prophet Jeremiah predicted the people's exile. Rachel's weeping for her children symbolizes the pain of an entire nation, but it also points to the promise of restoration and renewal. Rachel's lasting impact, lessons in patience, faith, and sacrifice. Rachel was not just a mother of 2 children. His life and death teach us profound lessons about patience, faith, and the cost of sacrifice. Rachel waited years to be a mother. She suffered in silence while her sister Leah gave birth to many children and, in the end, paid with her own life to bring Benjamin into the world. Rachel's journey reminds us that often the biggest dreams and desires are accompanied by great sacrifices. And even if we don't see the end result of our efforts, like Rachel didn't see the success of Jose and Benjamin, our legacies can continue to impact future generations. Rachel's eternal legacy. The story of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, is one of the most moving and profound in the Bible. His life was marked by love, waiting, pain, and sacrifice, but also by a lasting legacy that influenced generations. Rachel faced years of infertility, watching her sister Leah give birth to multiple children while she remained barren. Even so, she never lost hope, continuing to trust in the divine plan, until finally God answered her prayers, granting her the long-awaited son Joseph. Joseph's birth was a great victory for Rachel, a sign that God had not forgotten her. However, her joy was not complete, and she desired even more children. It was then that, in the middle of a trip to Ephrata, Rachel became pregnant again. But this pregnancy would bring not only the joy of another child, but also its tragic end. During Benjamin's birth, Rachel suffered intensely, and her life ended shortly after the boy's birth. With her last breath, she called him Benoni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob, in an act of love and redemption, changed his name to Benjamin, son of my right hand, giving his son a future of success. Honor. Rachel's impact was immense. Joseph, his firstborn, became one of the most powerful men in Egypt, saving not only his own family, but an entire nation from famine. Benjamin, the son who was born amid pain, gave rise to one of the most important tribes in Israel, which would later generate notable leaders such as King Saul and the Apostle Paul. Even after her death, Rachel's legacy remained alive. Her tomb, erected by Jacob on the side of the road to Bethlehem, became a symbol of love, sacrifice, and motherhood. To this day, it is visited by people seeking comfort and hope, especially women who face challenges conceiving. Rachel's story teaches us profound lessons about patience, faith, and the cost of sacrifice. It reminds us that although we may face great challenges and even irreparable losses, our actions and choices can impact the future in ways we cannot always predict. Just as Rachel never saw Joseph's success or Benjamin's growth, she planted seeds that would change Israel's history forever. Rachel is a powerful reminder that even in difficulties, God is present, and that the legacy we leave can transcend time, impacting lives far beyond our own.